Christ myth. So this is something that a lot of atheists bring up. It's also something that I just want to say, could this be? When people say Christ myth, sometimes they mean that Christ didn't exist at all, and sometimes they mean that Christ was sort of this creation from Roman mythology by the four gospel writers. So let's look at the times Yeshua was born in and these writers and see if this makes sense and is correct historically and is intellectually sound. Because in my thinking, we know Jesus existed not just because of the biblical text, but also we have three historians. We have Josephus, who was a Jewish historian during Jesus's time, and then two Roman historians, Tacitus and Suetonius, also living during Jesus's time and saying he's existing. So we can say, yes, he's existing. He's not a myth in that respect. But now let's look, is he a myth in the sense of from the mythology of the Roman gods of the time and these writers taking this on? Let's think about who is in power. So Herod the Great, his father was a converted Jew. And so, yes, he was Jewish, but he didn't have the long lineage of Judaism. And a lot of Jews knew this, and so we're skeptical of him. And well, they should be, because although Herod the Great was a colossal builder, I mean, he had two palaces on Masada, he created aqueducts, he was very concerned with water flow, he expanded the Second Temple and made it stunning, and made additions to it. So he was, in many respects, being honoring the Jewish people in Judea, and he also kept kosher, evidently. But this was the other side of Herod. Augustus Caesar said it's better to be his pig than his son. Well, why would he say that? Well, because Herod was keeping kosher, but at the same time, he killed his wife, he killed his mother-in-law, he killed his brother-in-law, he killed his two sons. Why? Because he was terrified that they were trying to take over his kingdom. So he was able to be extremely brutal, cruel, and bloody to even his family. So that would send a message to all of the Jews in Judea that even though he was Jewish, you had to be extremely careful. And as we know, when Jesus was born, he wanted to speak to the three wise men about Yeshua, and he had to have heard through the grapevine that Yeshua was born to a Virgin Mary, and that this was part of the prophecy in Isaiah. Because why else would he be so concerned about this child? He was so concerned that he had all males killed 2 and under that were around Bethlehem, because he wanted to make sure that that child would not usurp his kingdom, because it was also prophesied he'd be king of the Jews. So this to me verifies that Yeshua was born to a virgin, because that would pique his interest and would alert him to the fact that this was a special child. We also have the Quran, written in 600 AD, yes, but we have the Hebrew Bible. Many books in the Hebrew Bible were written hundreds of years after events happened. But we have in the Quran also a statement to the fact that Mary is mentioned 70 times, the only woman in the Quran. She's Jewish, she's a virgin, and she gives birth to Yeshua the Messiah. So Herod the Great is somebody to be very scared of as a Jewish person, even though he's, building up Judea and making it an incredible place. He also, when he did do these additions to the temple towards the end of his life, he decided, I think, to give like this little gift to Rome. And because the Roman Empire was overseeing him, he put an eagle on a gate that went up to the Second Temple. Now, you are not supposed to create any graven images, whether it's human or animal, around the temple. And doing this, of course, impacted the righteous Jews of that time, and so they plotted to take this eagle down. And Herod found out about this, and he burned these Jewish men alive. So this is the time period that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are living in. They're also living under the control of the Roman Empire through the Jewish and Roman wars. And that too, Rome is very brutal. Yes, they had their deities and their gods and goddesses, and they had like almost 100 of them, and deity equaled beauty. So of course, when we look back in the temples and the shrines and the sculptures and all of this do look beautiful, but they also were brutal. I mean, they are the ones who perfected the crucifixion process. And of course, John was a witness at the crucifixion, one of the gospel writers. And we know that Jesus was mocked by the Romans. A purple robe was put on him, the crown of thorns, and a reed in his hand, and they were mocking him as King of the Jews. They also pulled out his beard by their hands. They scourged him with the whip, and the whip would have had like glass and bone and metal in it, so it was ripping his skin. He was basically beaten and whipped beyond recognition, the Bible says. So we know that these Jewish men, and these were all four Jewish men, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were monotheists. They were not pantheists. So they were not embracing the pantheism of the time. They were living to be separate from that Roman ideology. And that's very important to think about, okay? That they were not embracing Roman mythology. It would have been an anathema to them. And the other thing is, if they were really writing up this God mythology, Isaiah 53:2 also prophesied that Jesus was ugly. Yes. He said in Isaiah 53:2, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. So when Yeshua walked into a room, you were not giving him a double take. In fact, he was probably short as well, because stature makes you sort of look up to somebody. So he's short, he's ugly. And is this really going to be how they're going to create a myth, a Christ myth? And he wasn't a king. He didn't have power and wealth and servants. And he wasn't a warrior. He didn't have a great army around him. So to me, this argument on Christ myth does not hold up when we look at the times and we look at the fact that these four men, who were they? Well, we know they were Jewish and they were monotheists, but Matthew was a tax collector. So he wasn't going to be in the myth, in the mythology of the imagination, because these gods and goddesses were created. He was a numbers man, right? And we have Mark, who was a zealot, who was an associate of Peter. He too would not have been in this framework. And then we have Luke, who was a doctor. And a scholar I came upon recently was explaining how Luke was the one who was writing a lot about the temple. And as such, he would have had to have been a Jew to know all about the temple practices and how it was there. And so being a doctor too, and Paul's doctor, Paul was a Jew. Paul did not want a Gentile doctor, I guarantee you. So I love the fact that this to me is new and a great revelation. And then we have John, who was a fisherman. And again, he is not going to be in his imagination and embracing the mythology of the Roman gods. He's a man who gets up early and he's dealing with the elements and he's bringing in fish. And he too saw the vicious crucifixion done by the Romans. So why in the world would he be embracing the Romans when he saw what they did to Yeshua? And then we have to think about 87 years after Yeshua. Okay, so in these times, these are Jewish followers following Yeshua. Okay, and Jesus had thousands of followers. He was feeding 5,000 and then 4,000. And people say, well, why weren't there thousands mourning him? Well, that's because if you did, you would get crucified. I mean, that was a reality at that time. And so a lot of people were very quiet and kept their religious beliefs private and a secret often. So 87 years after Yeshua, this is another reason why it just, to me, this Christ myth doesn't make sense. The Roman Emperor Hadrian comes into power, and he basically puts up a shrine to Adonis, who is the god of beauty and desire. He's putting that up in Bethlehem, around the cave where Yeshua was claimed to have been born. Then he puts a shrine of Venus up on the place where Jesus's tomb was to have been, and she's also the goddess of beauty and desire. And then Jupiter, a statue of Jupiter, who is the king of all gods of Rome mythology, he's putting that up on the crucifixion site of Jesus. So he wants to desecrate all of these sites, and he wants to remove the memory of Yeshua. And to me, again, you have to look at the times. And if this is Rome doing this to Yeshua, there is no way that these writers would have been embracing anything of the mythology of Rome. Respectfully. God bless. Love to you all.